Hello and welcome to the Of Interest podcast. Gareth Thorne from interest.co.nz. On Wednesday, August the 7th, Statistics New Zealand is set to release its latest quarterly labour market data for the June quarter. This is expected to show rising unemployment and will be closely watched, of course, by the Reserve Bank ahead of its next official cash rate review, which is due on August 14. So just what is going on in the labour or jobs market at the moment? To discuss this, I'm joined by Shannon Barlow, Managing Director of Frog Recruitment. Hi Shannon, and welcome back to the Of Interest podcast.
Kia ora, thanks for having me back again.
Yeah, look, we had you on previously as a guest 2 years ago, August 2022. It probably feels like a lifetime ago now.
Absolutely. I was looking back through my notes from our last conversation, and it was just quite amazing to see some of the huge changes and things completely flipped on their head that have come through. So, yeah, it'd be interesting to see how it's all going to pan out this time around.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that was a month after the borders had fully reopened, obviously, after the sort of peak of the COVID-19 pandemic and the restrictions had passed or were passing. And employers had, of course, been bemoaning labour shortages in that period. And it was a labour market or a jobs market where job seekers and employees certainly held the balance of power rather than employers at that time. So 2 years on, how much have things changed?
Yeah, well, absolutely. That's probably been one of the most dramatic changes. So it didn't take long at all for that balance of power to shift back to the employer from job seekers. Some other big changes were wage rises, and now we're seeing a massive decrease in job vacancies as well. I guess to balance that out, some things haven't really changed that much. So, unemployment is still at a relatively low rate, although I'm sure next week's rates will show it an increase there. But there's always that kind of doom and gloom reporting when the unemployment rate increases. But you've got to remember that we've been sitting at record lows and that it's part of the plan to tame inflation was to engineer a recession and to drive up unemployment. So we shouldn't be surprised. We don't have to like it, but it shouldn't be a surprise when those things actually happen. I think similarly with skill shortages, so although we are seeing a huge increase in applications and certainly the borders opening and the effects of migration have increased the talent pool and people we have available, but I don't think it's actually solved our skill shortage problem. So just having more people available doesn't mean that necessarily they're the right people for what we need.
Okay, yeah, there's a lot to unpack, I guess. So that migration, I think, is a really interesting one because of course, when the borders were shut, there weren't migrants coming in, and then there was a absolute torrent of migration. I think we had a record high for a calendar year in 2023 of 126,000, according to Statistics NZ. How has this impacted the jobs market? And as you say, like it hasn't solved all our skills issues. Are there any industries where it's really benefited and others, I guess, where they're still scratching around looking for staff?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting one because you asked me last time about circuit breakers to the tight labour market. And I said that definitely opening the borders and the changes to the immigration settings, including the skilled visas particularly, would bring welcome relief, and they have. But that it wasn't going to be a silver bullet to solve all our skills shortage problems. And there was also that risk that we'd lose more people than we gained in key work areas. So I guess it's a bit of a bugger being right sometimes because that is how it's kind of played out. So the record migration levels experienced at the end of last year, I think in a way it created this perception that it would be great, it's solved, it's going to be easy to fill job vacancies. So the recruitment industry particularly went from having businesses knocking down the door for help to find candidates to having clients feel quite confident that they were going to be able to handle recruitment themselves. And, all of those things led to that balance of power switching firmly back to the employer. but it hasn't quite played out that way. So the problem is that quantity doesn't always equal quality. There's been problems with the new accredited employer program, and the new government is still working through changes to those immigration settings. So we haven't got it quite right yet. So although we've refilled the talent pool, we haven't necessarily attracted the right people to be able to cover our areas of skill shortages. Plus, we might have had record migration, but we've also had record numbers of Kiwis leaving New Zealand this year. So it was something like for every Kiwi returning, we were losing 3, and most of those were to Australia as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We've I think in the last figures, it's flipped around and there's a net outflow now. In terms of, are there any particular industries that, in terms of skill shortages, that are really still feeling it?
Yeah, all of them. So last time, I think you asked me the reverse of that question, and asked about if there were any industries that weren't struggling to find workers, and I said an absolute no. It's across the board, and that's been flipped on its head. So this time around, it's really hard to find an industry that's having an easy ride for job seekers. And I think a lot of this is due to competing cost pressures on businesses. So even industries that are still facing skills shortages are finding it challenging balancing that need to have adequate staff levels to deliver and managing those costs in a prolonged high-interest environment. So take the health sector, for example. It's a prime example. So just this week, there was an article about placements for graduate nurses being pulled, and anxious wait for those nurses to see if they'd be able to get work in New Zealand now that they're qualified. At the same time, so in the same week, we also saw reports of understaffed hospitals at risk of compromising patient safety, and then also all within that backdrop of some really aggressive recruitment campaigns from our neighbours across the ditch. So I think it is definitely still a struggle there, and even in some of those industries where there's still skill shortages, it doesn't mean that it's a free ticket in for job seekers to get work there. There can still be some barriers, mainly due to costs.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously the job vacancies are down, and we've seen that, Stats NZ figures out this week had the number of filled jobs in New Zealand fell for a third consecutive month, all that type of thing. So, I mean, what are the industries where the vacancies are really falling away significantly?
Again, it's
everything.
I can just rinse and repeat that answer because it truly is affecting all areas. And definitely means that it's intense competition for job seekers as well.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of what you're seeing, are you, seeing some vacancies where there's a huge number of applicants all chasing the same job? I mean, what sort of, dozens, hundreds? I mean, any sort of anecdotes you can share on that?
Yeah, so for our recruitment agency, we're probably experiencing around 3 to 4 times the volume of applications compared with last year, and that's across the board, across different industries and job types. At the extremes, it can be even more than that. So for some business support, other industries like supply chain or operational roles, where we were happy to get say 30 applications we'd be celebrating last year. Now those can reach up to nearly 300 applications, and that's within a week. So, you have to pull the ad so that you've got the time to get through all those applications. Yeah,
that's hundreds of people looking for work. What about different regions around the country? I mean, obviously there's been very well publicised public service layoffs in Wellington. So that's one region where I wonder how it's faring.
Can I just add something more to that last bit? I'd say with the higher volumes of applications as well, I think the biggest factor isn't actually about there being more people looking for work. As I said, unemployment is still relatively low if you look at a longer term aspect. The big factor is that there are less jobs available. So there's less than half the number of job postings in the market today compared with the same time late 2022. And every single industry type on the New Zealand Job Index is now below 100. So that the average decline is around about 50%, and some faring worse than others.
When you talk about the average decline below 50%, what does that mean?
So the number of jobs advertised within that industry. So and comparing against kind of the same time last year.
Right. So they're a lot lower.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You do have to balance that out because last year we were still probably still experienced that peak of vacancies and businesses trying to rebuild after COVID and staff back up. So it kind of comes from a higher base, but 50% drop still massive.
Yeah. And have you seen any employers who have advertised a job and then come back to you and said, oh, sorry, no, we need to pull that. We decided we can't afford it or we don't want to do it right now. Is that happening too?
That's happening a lot. So I guess there's been a lot where sometimes it's been a reaction. So looking at the business and going, right, we need this position. It's important. Let's go for it. Let's put everything in place to recruit this and fill it quickly so we can get on with things. But then there can often be some red tape or rethinking the situation. Oh, maybe we don't need that level of role. Maybe we could backfill at a lower level. Or, maybe we can switch the duties around with the staff that we have. So, yeah, that's been a big factor in recruitment, particularly in the last 12 months or so, where the goalposts change a bit, or it might get, quite far through the process. And then higher levels will say, actually, we don't have the budget for that anymore, or, the situation's changed, we're going to take a different approach to this. So, yeah, that's been happening more and more.
And back to the question on the regions, is there regional kind of discrepancies that you're seeing around the country?
Yes, there are, and it's bad news for Auckland and Wellington. So, usually our two big powerhouses, that's where it's being felt the most. So Auckland experienced an almost 48% annual decline in jobs, and Wellington was nearly just as bad with 48%.
So that's in job vacancies or ads?
Job ads.
Job ads, okay, yep.
And I guess for Wellington, unfortunately, that's likely to get worse as the government cutbacks are still continuing to play out. I guess on the positive side, try to get some positives in there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So Te Waipounamu wins out in the battle of North and South, with West Coast, Southland and Nelson Tasman regions experiencing increased job listings. So it's not the whole country, and there are some pockets of looking like it's maybe starting to turn a corner.
So, yeah, as I noted at the top, next week, or Wednesday the 7th, we get the latest June quarter labour market statistics from Statistics NZ. Reserve Bank is expecting a 4.6% unemployment rate, which would be up from 4.3% in the March quarter. And obviously when we had you on last time in 2022, it was just 3.3%. So there's obviously a rising unemployment going on, intense competition for job vacancies. I'm just wondering, are there still pay rises? Are people still, obviously when we spoke in 2022, you were talking about people getting 20 to 30% wage rises in manufacturing, transport and logistics, or are some people now having to take pay cuts?
Yes, unfortunately that is the case. So at that time, we had already started to see particular industries were going hard to go, right, we need to ramp up, so we're going to throw some money behind it. And I guess across the board we were starting to see that wages were increasing, but it still wasn't keeping up with inflation. So job seekers were in demand at the time, and we were seeing employees and job seekers using those market conditions as a bargaining chip to secure better conditions overall, and a big part of that was pay rises, and it definitely worked. So from there, salary and wages rapidly increased, and if we look now, the wage increases matching CPI in the last quarter. And I guess if you look at another measure, so the average ordinary hourly earnings, although it's a bit of a mouthful, that one, so that peaked at 7.6 and has been outpacing inflation and is currently still sitting at 5.2. So I guess wages caught up and then passed inflation's, whereas now that hopefully we're getting that under control. What that means is it's definitely levelling out, but in some areas, job seekers will now be in a position where they need to consider taking a pay cut to secure a new role at the same level because those salaries just weren't sustainable.
That is going to hurt people.
Yes.
Yeah, it's going to, I mean, I guess at the end of the day, if you have to do it, you'll do it. But there must be a lot of job seekers who are pretty grumpy about that sort of thing.
I would say so. And if you think of it, there'll be a lot who are in a situation where it's a double whammy. So they may have lost their job through redundancy. So apart from, I guess, the shock and the ramifications of that, they're also, right, I've got to get something new and I need to get it fast. But looking at, I'm going to have to take a big cut from where I was previously. So a double dose of hurt for them.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess, are there any particular industries where that's happening in terms of people having to take pay cuts?
Again, I think it is fairly widespread. I think one of the areas within our jobs would be our graduate or lower level, entry level roles. We're being able to demand quite high salaries for a start. So I think it will impact there quite a bit, because if they're having to make a move to somewhere else, they're not going to be able to get those same levels that they were when there was they were even more in demand.
From the employer's perspective, obviously when we spoke in 2022, the biggest challenge was finding or retaining staff. What would it be now?
Productivity, I would say. So New Zealand typically underperforms when it comes to productivity measures, and I think this is going to be a really big challenge, as chances are most businesses will be trying to do more with less staff, and will have been running pretty lean operations to keep costs down. So things like AI, automation and technology are often proposed as solutions or ways to improve productivity, but many businesses won't have the budget to be able to invest in that kind of development right now.
And in terms of, I guess, what we saw happen during the COVID-19 pandemic and the massive impact that had on the labour market, are there any lingering impacts, or do you think they've all kind of worn through now?
No, there's still some there, definitely. So we talked about brain drain. Just to add to that, I guess you've got a whole cohort of people who missed out on having their big OE and instead, took long walks with the dog while in lockdowns. Not quite the same. So they're off travelling now, and of course adding to the numbers of the people who would usually go at that time as well. So it's just kind of enhanced that effect. I think one of the biggest impacts from the pandemic is changes to the way that we work. So hybrid working has definitely become the norm. Flexible working pre-COVID, it existed, it was there, but it was seen more as a privilege and perhaps offered to the lucky few, where now there's that expectation that flexibility should be offered to everyone in some shape or form. Yeah,
so, I mean, you're talking there, I guess, at least in part about working from home. What are the attitudes like? I mean, from employers, are some happy with that. I guess others aren't so happy. And as you say, a lot of workers are just going to expect to be able to, so at least some of the time now, aren't they?
Yeah, we saw that while I guess job seekers still held the cards, so it was being used as a bargaining chip or a deal breaker. So I think it was something like 13% of job seekers we surveyed said if there wasn't flexibility, they would dismiss that offer and go for something else. So it really has shown to be important, but perhaps it's not going to be used so much when things like job security are going to be more important. So yeah, it's definitely still a thing for job seekers or for employees. And I think on the other side of things, employers in New Zealand at least have become comfortable with working from home. So, there's always going to be differences, and you'll have your old school mentality, no, let's get them all back in the office. But I think as a whole, we've been pretty good at realising, yes, this can work, and actually there's some benefits from having this type of flexibility. So, there were definitely fears that it would affect productivity, but managed appropriately. Most have actually seen productivity gains rather than the opposite. We found that 49% of teams had individual flexibility arrangements this year. And I think the key is the individual part, so considering the individual and not trying to have a one-size-fits-all kind of arrangement, and making sure that you're creating an environment to get the best from them and also for them. So the other thing as well is that for employers, the ability to offer flexibility can be a really valuable benefit to attract and retain staff. So especially when they may not be in a position to be able to offer salary increases, but they can arrange things a different way, which can be a really huge help to employees trying to save money by working from home. So if you think the likes of travel costs, petrol, and even time costs, and being able to provide more of that work-life balance.
Mm. And what's your sense in terms of when or whether the market will kind of hit a bottom, I guess, in terms of the volume of job vacancies, that type of thing, the job ads? I mean, is there still further to fall here, do you think?
Yes and no. I am hoping that things have bottomed out, and that things will slowly. I don't think it's going to be a rapid change, but that things will slowly but surely improve. And we are starting to see signs of improvement, so particularly in the regions, as I mentioned. But I guess Wellington is likely to have more pain to get through. And for Auckland, it takes a bit longer to kind of crank up the engine again to get things moving for here as well. But yeah, I do think we're through the worst of it, and can start to grab that foothold.
Mm. And I mean, for you guys working in the recruitment industry, is it quieter at a time like this? Or is it still busy because there are still lots of job seekers looking for work? But I mean, there are less jobs for them to find. Or does it kind of not really make much difference? Like if the job market's booming, like it was 2 years ago, you would have been busy. Are you still busy now, but in a different way? Yeah.
Well, it definitely makes a difference. But as you say, you're still busy, but busy with different things. So it's definitely a more of a fight and determination to keep up that business development and maintain your relationships with clients as well. So even if they might not be in a position to recruit right now, to make sure that you're still providing a good service so that when things change, and things will change, they'll remember that you've done right by them. The other side of that is obviously the number of job seekers coming to us has vastly increased. So I think it's about being able to manage that, and so that you're setting clear expectations and not over-promising, but also being realistic on whether or not we're likely to be able to help them this time, or if there's good prospects in their areas.
So 2 years ago, I asked you what could be the circuit breaker to I guess, the very tight labour market that we had. So I guess let's flip that around, and what could be the circuit breaker to the labour market we have now?
Yeah, so I do think with the inflation rate closing in on that 1% to 3% range, and it's tipped to see a rate drop earlier than we expected this year, and of course we've already seen the banks moving on mortgage rates. All of these things help to relieve pressure on both businesses and individuals. So he is hoping that that has a big impact. And as the cost of doing business eases, confidence will improve. And I think we're starting to see that already. And it should also free up some money to be able to invest in its people and productivity improvement measures, and to really kind of look to the future towards growth.
Okay, well, look, thanks so much for that, Shannon. That's Shannon Barlow, Managing Director of Frog Recruitment. And I'm Gareth Vaughan from interest.co.nz with another episode of our Of Interest